For over 30 years, you've seen it as cinema's ultimate monster. The earth-shaking roar, the eyes tracking your every terrified move, teeth like railway spikes lunging out of the darkness. But the truth is stranger and far quieter. What if everything you know about Tyrannosaurus rex is a lie? A full-grown adult weighed 9 tons and lived perhaps 30 years, yet spent the vast majority of its life walking slowly through misty Cretaceous forests, conserving energy like a colossal, patient specter. Its bones tell a story of decades of brutal fights survived, of inflammatory diseases endured, and of a social life we are only just beginning to understand. Tonight, we strip away the Hollywood monster and step into the real, fog-shrouded world of the late Cretaceous to ask, what was life really like for a Tyrannosaurus rex? But here is the thing. The real T-Rex was not just a gentle walker. It was an anatomical contradiction. A 9-ton paradox with a bite force of 35,000 newtons, enough to splinter solid bone like dry twigs, yet also a creature so fragile that nearly every adult skull ever found is riddled with the scars of inflammatory disease and healed fractures. For decades, paleontologists have been dismantling the Hollywood myth, using evidence pulled straight from the Cretaceous mud, tiny fossilized tendons, marrow cavities that chart growth year by year, and even traces of actual blood vessels and collagen preserved for 68 million years. This is not hearsay. This is the closest thing we have to a living, breathing animal frozen in stone. So why should you care? Because the T-Rex is the ultimate detective story, and the clues are rewriting everything we thought we knew about what it means to be an apex predator. Every puckered scar on a snout tells of a decade of brutal face-biting combat. Every isotopic signature in a tooth reveals a shift in diet from nimble lizard hunter in youth to bone-crushing titan in adulthood. And the most shocking clue of all, a collection of skeletons found buried together, side by side, suggests these animals did not always walk alone. Tonight, we are going to follow this survivor from the chilly fog of a Cretaceous morning, through a 100-square-kilometer territory of ferns and towering araucaria trees, to the quiet, patient, and utterly misunderstood reality of its daily life. Forget the roaring tyrant. The real king spent the vast majority of his reign just walking. And only on very rare, very bad days did he remind the world why he wore the crown. Let's find out what that world actually looked like. So let's step into that world right now. You are no longer in a dark bedroom or a lecture hall. You are standing on the edge of a vast, humid floodplain. The year is roughly 66 million years ago, give or take a few thousand autumns. This is the very end of the Cretaceous, a place paleontologists call the Hell Creek Formation, a sprawling prehistoric landscape that covers what is now Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. But if you are expecting a swampy, volcanic nightmare from an old dinosaur book, adjust your expectations right now. The Hell Creek ecosystem was not a horror movie backdrop. It was, for the most part, deceptively beautiful, and the king of this world looked nothing like the raging reptile you remember from your childhood. You look up. The sky is a dim orange, not from fire, but from a sun that seems permanently low and hazy. The air is cool and thick with moisture, saturated with the scent of damp earth, ancient conifers, and the subtle perfume of flowering plants that have only recently begun their conquest of the planet. Around you, the forest is built on a scale that makes modern redwoods look modest. Towering araucaria trees, ancient relatives of the monkey puzzle tree, stretch 100 feet into the mist. Their branches form a broken canopy, allowing shafts of golden light to pierce the low-hanging fog and illuminate patches of the forest floor. There are no grasses here. Grass hasn't evolved yet. Instead, the ground is a tangled, Spongy carpet of ferns, cycads, and horsetails, broken only by the muddy banks of slow, meandering rivers. And in the distance you hear it, a sound that isn't a roar, it's not even a growl. It's a deep, rhythmic, percussive thump that you feel in your chest long before you can locate its source. It's the sound of 9 tons of muscle, bone, and patience moving through the undergrowth. And there it is. Push aside a giant fern frond, and you see it. A fully grown Tyrannosaurus rex. But it is not chasing a jeep. It is not throwing its head back and shrieking at the sky. It is walking. Just walking. Its massive, 3-toed feet, each one leaving a print over a foot long, sink silently into the soft, wet soil. Its tail, a colossal muscular balancing pole, sways gently behind it, clearing a path through the low vegetation. Its head, a 5-foot-long battering ram of solid bone, is held low, parallel to the ground, its giant amber eyes blinking slowly, scanning the gloom ahead, not with a predator's frantic hunger, but with the slow, deliberate calm of a landlord inspecting a property they have owned for 1,000 years. This is not a monster. This is a perfectly tuned, living machine. And the first thing you need to understand is that this machine was designed not for chaos, but for a kind of brutal, grinding conservation. This animal's entire existence was an energy equation. And that equation begins with the shocking truth about its temperature. For decades, the battle in the halls of paleontology was vicious. Were dinosaurs slow, sluggish, cold-blooded lizards, doomed to extinction by their own stupidity? Or were they hyperactive, warm-blooded bird relatives, zipping around like the raptors in those movies? The T-Rex, it turns out, was neither. Or rather, it was a secret third thing that makes its daily life so deeply strange. By analyzing the very molecules of oxidative stress locked inside its fossilized thigh bones, researchers in 2024 confirmed that Tyrannosaurus rex was indeed warm-blooded, like a modern bird. But here is the catch. It had one of the lowest metabolic rates ever recorded in a theropod dinosaur. Think of it not as a furnace, but as a high-efficiency pilot light that took decades to burn through its fuel. It wasn't an energetic, fluttering songbird. It was a patient, generation-spanning emu the size of a building. This metabolic reality dictated every single hour of its life. Unlike a lion, which must kill every few days to feed a roaring internal engine, the adult T-Rex possessed a physiology that allowed it to operate on a much slower clock. It could afford to wait. It could afford to fail. And, most crucially, it could afford to just walk. And so, its morning patrol begins. The territory you've stepped into spans roughly 100 square kilometers, an area larger than the island of Manhattan. This is its kingdom, and it knows every inch of it, not by sight. At least, not only by sight, but by a sense that makes its vision seem almost redundant. Forget the myth of movement-based eyesight from the movies. The T-Rex's binocular vision, with both eyes facing forward like a hawk, was actually shockingly good. Recent scans of its brain case show it could resolve details at a distance far better than a modern eagle's. But looking at the world was only half the story. The real navigation system was its nose. Deep inside that massive skull, the olfactory bulbs, the parts of the brain dedicated to processing smell, were gigantic, enormous. They were the size of grapefruits. This meant the world came to the T-Rex not primarily as a visual landscape, but as a rich, layered, 3-dimensional map of scent. As it walks, head swinging low, it is reading the morning's headlines in odor. That patch of disturbed ferns, a herd of Triceratops passed through 4 hours ago, their droppings still steaming faintly with bacterial decay. That particular muddy bank, saturated with the musky, adrenalized scent of an ankylosaurus that rolled in the mud to rid itself of skin parasites. Overnight, This chemical map allowed the T-Rex to patrol its vast territory without ever breaking into a run. It could pinpoint where prey had been, where it was likely to be heading, and, most importantly for an animal that hated wasting energy, where it absolutely wasn't worth looking. But here is the thing. The T-Rex you are watching right now, this 9-ton, 40-foot-long emperor of the floodplain, it didn't start out like this, and the journey from an awkward, fluffy teenager to this earth-shaking titan is one of the most profound and dangerous coming-of-age stories in natural history. A story that literal decades of combat trauma are written all over its face. This is where we need to talk about the bones. Not just any bones, but a specific bone found in a specimen named Sue, the most complete T-Rex skeleton ever found. Sue is a celebrity in the dinosaur world, but her skeleton hides a violent secret. By counting the growth rings in her leg bones, much like counting the rings on a tree, scientists determined that Sue died at around 30 years old, and she lived a life so brutal, so filled with physical trauma, that it forces us to totally rethink the daily existence of these animals. Sue's skeleton is a catalog of pain. She had a broken shoulder blade, torn tendons in her arms, a fractured rib that healed crookedly, and perhaps most disturbingly, holes in the back of her jawbone that were once thought to be bite marks from another T-Rex, but which closer analysis suggests were caused by a parasitic infection that literally rotted through the bone. She walked around with a golf ball-sized hole in her jaw, potentially for years, eating, breathing, and living with the constant background agony of a face-eating disease. And Sue was not an outlier. Almost every adult T-Rex skull ever found is pockmarked and scarred with similar lesions. Paleontologists call these face-biting marks, the signs of a life spent locked in violent, jaw-to-jaw combat with other members of their own species. But when did this violence start? To understand that, we need to rewind Sue's life. We need to go back to the awkward age of 13. This is where a fascinating new study from January 2026 completely upends what we thought we knew. For years, scientists believed that T-Rex grew fast and furious, packing on the pounds in a teenage growth spurt and reaching full size by about age 25. Then shuffling off the mortal coil shortly after. But an exhaustive new analysis of 17 different individuals, from tiny 2-year-olds to the full-grown behemoths, just rewrote that timeline by 15 crucial years. We now know that Tyrannosaurus rex did not finish growing at 25. It kept growing, slowly and steadily, well into its late 30s. This means that the animal experienced a prolonged teenage phase lasting nearly 2 decades. Imagine being an awkward adolescent for 20 years. 20 years of dodging the adults who might cannibalize you. 20 years of being too large to hide, but too small to fight back. This is the crucible that forged the adult predator. For these lanky, long-legged teenagers, the forests of Hell Creek were not a kingdom. They were a death trap. Because while the 9-ton adult you see before you could afford to walk slowly and conserve energy, this teenager had to run. Its body was anatomically distinct from its parents. Younger T-Rex were built like cheetahs, relatively lean, with longer legs and a narrow, blade-like skull fitted with dozens of small, zipping teeth, not the railroad spike crushing pegs of the adult. They weren't equipped to crush the bones of a triceratops. They were built to chase down the fast, small, nimble prey that the adults couldn't be bothered with. Little ornithopods, fleeing lizards, and perhaps each other. This is what ecologists call ontogenetic niche partitioning, a fancy term for a brutal reality that a T-Rex at age 14 was filling a completely different job in the ecosystem than a T-Rex at age 30. They were not parent and child in a happy family. They were competitors, and this brings us to the quiet, terrifying threshold that this fully grown adult patrols towards right now. Because the 100 square kilometers of territory it claims is not just a map of prey scents, it is a constantly shifting map of rivals. The deep, rumbling sound that you feel in your chest right now is not a call to an unseen friend. It is a warning, a geological rumble that transmits through the solid earth, letting every other large theropod within 10 miles know that this specific patch of forest is occupied. You watch as the massive animal stops walking. It raises its enormous head, amber eyes fixed on a break in the tree line, a section of the forest where the ferns are trampled and several young conifers are snapped clean in half. You can see deep, parallel gouges carved into the mud, the sign of a massive struggle. This is the ancient equivalent of a territorial dispute. Another adult T-Rex was here recently, and now, this one has found its scent. The air changes. The gentle, slow-walking landlord vanishes in an instant. The head lowers, the massive thighs, muscles thicker than bridge cables, tense slightly. The bird-like foot claws grip the soil. This is not a lunge. It is a shift into a different gear, a gear that the animal almost never uses, but which has been the stuff of nightmares for 66 million years. And for the first time, you realize that the quiet patience of this predator is not gentleness. It is the terrifying restraint of an animal who knows it can afford to save its energy for the one moment it truly matters. The hunt. But what exactly did it hunt? And why does the evidence now suggest that the most violent moments of its life didn't involve a triceratops at all, but the face of another T-Rex right in front of it? The carnage is just beginning, and the truth about what happened next will change how you see this planet's greatest predator forever. The immediate question, of course, is what did it actually kill? For a century, the image of Tyrannosaurus Rex has been a cinematic master of the charge, a high-speed executioner who lived in a frenzy of slashing claws and snapping jaws. But the pile of fossilized vomit and the occasional fossilized feces tell a far more surprising story. When you look at the stomach contents and the direct traces of feeding, a picture emerges not of a glutton, but of a gourmand who could afford to be picky. The apex predator of the late Cretaceous ate with the surgical precision of a chef deboning a fish, and its favorite menu item was a lumbering tank of an animal that could easily kill it with one wrong move. Triceratops. In fact, multiple fossilized Triceratops skeletons have been found with the telltale signs of a T-Rex dinner party. The frills are often bitten off and peeled downward, as if the massive jaws clamped onto the bony shield and ripped it away from the skull to access the nutritious neck muscles beneath. There is no polite nibbling here. This is brute force butchery, and the key to this butchery was a weapon that still holds the world record for the most powerful bite ever evolved on land. When researchers at the University of Liverpool created a fully muscled biomechanical model of the T-Rex skull, the numbers were staggering. A single tooth at the back of the jaw could deliver a sustained pressure of up to 57,000 newtons. That is the equivalent of having a medium-sized elephant toothpick balanced on a single fang. The bones didn't just break, they explosively shattered from the inside out. This is why you never find a T-Rex tooth just simply lost. You find them embedded 6 inches deep in the solid bone of a hadrosaur's tail. And it is this very fossil, a single tooth crown driven into the tail vertebra of a duck-billed dinosaur, surrounded by a ring of healed bone, that gives us the most terrifying snapshot of all. The T-Rex bit that animal, and the animal got away. It lived for weeks, perhaps months, with that tooth rattling around inside its spine, the bone knitting around it like a tree swallowing a barbed wire fence. This was not an ambush of the weak and sick. This was a failed assassination attempt on a healthy, resilient target. The T-Rex lost that meal, and the prey limped away with a permanent scar to prove it. The myth of the sloppy scavenger, the idea that T-Rex just wandered around eating dead things, dies right here in this muddy Cretaceous field. Scavenging, of course, was absolutely on the table. A 9-ton animal does not say no to a free 1,200-pound Edmontosaurus carcass. But the evidence of healed bite marks on living bone tells us that this animal actively and regularly targeted creatures that fought back. But here is the pivot that changes everything you just pictured. When we think of a T-Rex killing, we picture a single, solitary monster fighting a duel with a Triceratops. But what if that picture is profoundly wrong? What if the most dangerous predator the world has ever seen did not fight alone? Let me take you away from the solitary morning patrol for just a moment. Let me take you to a small patch of ground in southern Utah, at a place paleontologists have named the Rainbow Site. Here, in an area smaller than a suburban living room, the bones of 4, possibly 5 different tyrannosaurids have been found, not scattered randomly, not washed together by a flood. They are mingled together in a way that geochemical analysis of the rare earth elements in their bones proves they died at the exact same time. This was a mass fatality event, a social group buried together in a catastrophic moment. And the Rainbow's site is not alone. In Montana, another site holds the remains of 3 Daspletosaurus, jackknifed together in what appears to be a family unit. In South Dakota, when the legendary T-Rex fossil Sioux was unearthed, her bones were surrounded by the remains of at least 2 more T-Rex individuals. For decades, the paleontological establishment was deeply uncomfortable with the idea of social tyrannosaurs. The thinking went, these were apex predators. They filled the role of crocodiles or Komodo dragons, solitary, cannibalistic, and incapable of the emotional complexity needed to tolerate another of their kind. But the bones refused to cooperate with that narrative. Philip Currie, one of the world's foremost tyrannosaur experts, now puts it bluntly, undoubtedly, this group died together, which adds to a growing body of evidence that tyrannosaurids were capable of interacting as gregarious packs. And if you want to see that pack in motion, you don't need a fossilized bone bed. You need to travel north to the misty, cold coastline of ancient British Columbia. Here, walked into the mudflats of history, are a series of footprints. 3 individual tyrannosaurs, ranging from a massive adult to a mid-sized subadult and a smaller juvenile, all moving in the exact same heading, all walking at the exact same time, or so closely in time that the mud hadn't yet hardened between their steps. They weren't wandering aimlessly, they were heading somewhere together, a destination, perhaps a migration route, perhaps a hunting ground. The tracks show the group traveling in close formation, not as competitors, but as a unit. Suddenly, the solitary morning patrol we witnessed earlier looks less like a rule and more like a temporary state. The fully grown, 9-ton adult we saw walking slowly through the ferns might not have been a misanthrope at all. It might simply have been an empty nester. And the devastating truth of the T-Rex's social life is that the loneliness of the adult stage is not a design flaw. It is a brutal, deliberate, and mathematically ruthless feature of its life cycle. To understand why, we need to go back to the awkward teenage phase, that prolonged 20-year window of adolescence we talked about. This is where the real social bond, if it existed, was forged. We now know, thanks to that January 2026 growth study, that a T-Rex was effectively a teenager for half of its life, from the moment it hatched from an ostrich-sized egg. Covered in a downy coat of primitive feathers, it was a liability to its parents. A 2-year-old T-Rex barely the size of a Labrador could not compete with a 9-ton titan for a Triceratops carcass. If the adults tolerated the juveniles at all, it was likely a tense and dangerous arrangement. The juveniles likely banded together, not out of familial affection, but out of sheer survival pressure. You stay in a group because the moment you walk away from that loose affiliation of fellow razor-toothed teenagers, you become the hunted. The pack, in this light, was less a wolf pack and more a gang. A street gang where the currency was bite force, and betrayals were not just likely, they were inevitable. The face-biting lesions that pockmark every single adult's skull are not just battle scars from rivals. Some of them show signs of healing and re-injury, meaning these animals fought each other repeatedly over the course of their lives. They knew each other. They bit each other's faces, healed, and then did it again. This is not an attack to kill. It is the signature of a dominance hierarchy. The T-Rex didn't just fight for food. It fought for social standing, for territory, and perhaps for the right to breed. And when you look closely at the pathology of those hideous jaw infections, you realize these animals lived for years with bones rotting inside their own heads. The pain must have been unimaginable. It also means they were cared for. An animal with a jawbone half dissolved by necrosis could not hunt. If Sue survived for months, maybe years, with a hole in her face, she was receiving help, she was being tolerated, or even provisioned with food by a family unit that refused to let her starve. The soft tissue evidence takes this emotional complexity even further. In 2005, paleontologist Mary Schweitzer stunned the world by pulling what looked like flexible blood vessels and red blood cells out of the shattered thigh bone of a 68-million-year-old T-Rex. The discovery was so explosive, so seemingly impossible, that it was labeled a contamination. But it wasn't. The iron in the dinosaur's blood had, in a miraculous process called Fenton chemistry, locked the proteins in place like an embalming fluid, preserving the microscopic architecture of life across eons. Inside those translucent, squishy tissues, scientists identified fragments of collagen, the literal building block of skin and bone. And the collagen of the T-Rex tells a story that stones alone cannot. The molecular signature of its proteins matches that of chickens and ostriches more closely than any living reptile. It is the iron from its own blood that has kept its flesh from turning to dust. To look at a T-Rex skeleton is to look at a mummified bird, a warm-blooded, feathered, and ultimately fragile giant wrapped in a terrifying suit of armor. The feathers themselves, by the way, are a bitter controversy. Large skin impressions from adult Tyrannosaurs show pebbly, scaly hide, not feathers. But the juveniles of close relatives have been found covered in filamentous fuzz. It is entirely possible, as paleontologist Stephen Brusatte suggests, that the adult T-Rex was mostly scaly, having shed its baby fluff like a gigantic reptilian elephant losing its downy hair. On a cold Cretaceous morning, steam would have risen from its bare, pebbled back, a living, breathing, sweating dinosaur. The real T-Rex, therefore, was not a lizard-like slowpoke, nor a hyperactive feathery demon. It was a paradox, a social, slow-growing, long-enduring survivor who could crush a car with its jaws, but who might have been nurtured by its family when sick. It was an animal that walked slowly through the forest, not because it was stupid, but because it was confident. It didn't need to run. The world ran from it. But quiet confidence was not the only daily concern. The animal's massive body was a walking catastrophe of physical stress. We haven't even talked about the parasites. Within the residue of coprolites, the fossilized dung, scientists have found the eggs of extinct intestinal worms, tapeworms longer than your arm, likely coiled in its intestines. Flea-like insects probably crawled across its eyelids, and the very bones that held it upright were under constant attack from within. In nearly every adult specimen, the finger bones and ribs show a condition called avulsion, where the ligaments were literally pulled off the bone by the sheer weight of the creature. During a sudden movement, imagine living with the perpetual sensation of a torn hamstring. For a T-Rex, that was just Tuesday. The tiny, notoriously useless arms, each one barely 3 feet long, were not a joke. They were the anchor points for hideously powerful chest muscles. To rise from a resting position, a 9-ton animal had to do a push-up. It would rock forward, plant its chin on the ground, then wrench itself upward using those muscular little limbs as a pivot. Every single morning, the king had to perform a strenuous gymnastic maneuver just to stand up. No wonder it walked so much. Sitting down was a commitment. Getting back up was a crisis. And so, as the Cretaceous evening draws near and the orange sky turns a bruised purple, you watch this solitary titan complete its 15-mile loop. It hasn't eaten today. It hasn't even tried to hunt. It has simply walked, scent-checked its territory, and drunk from a murky river. But the scent map of its kingdom has changed. A new odor now dominates the eastern edge of the forest. The sharp, coppery tang of fresh blood, and not the blood of a Triceratops. It is the blood of another Tyrannosaurus rex. The violence that had been so patiently stored is about to be spent. The animal lowers its head and begins one of the few things it ever allowed itself to do quickly. It leaves the mist and steps into the clearing, and in that moment, you realize the quiet life of the king was only ever a prelude. The next chapter was always written in bone, and the evidence for how that chapter ends will change your understanding of the entire planet forever. The clearing isn't empty. The air here is heavy, not just with moisture, but with the iron tang of fresh blood, so strong you can taste the metal at the back of your throat. The adult T-Rex, the one you followed for miles, steps fully out of the shadow of the araucarias and surveys the scene with an expression you can't read. A massive bull triceratops lies on its side in the mud. Its frill is broken in 2 places, the bone shards flecked with crimson. A deep, crescent-shaped bite mark cleaves its pelvis, exposing the pale marrow. This is a fresh kill. But the Triceratops is not what holds the T-Rex's attention. On the far side of the carcass, half hidden by a screen of crushed horsetails, lies the body of another Tyrannosaurus rex. A sub-adult, maybe 17 years old. Its skull is caved in above the left eye. The wound is not from a horn. It's from a bite that could only have been delivered by a larger member of its own kind. Your T-Rex, the 9-ton adult, stands motionless for a long time. The massive olfactory bulbs are processing 100 different molecular signals from the scene. And then it does something completely unexpected. It does not roar. It does not feed. It lowers its head until its snout is inches from the dead teenager's face. It exhales once, a low, rumbling sigh that vibrates through the mud, then turns and begins to eat. Not from the Triceratops, from the T-Rex. Face-biting, the signature of social dominance, had escalated into something lethal. And this moment forces us to look at the scars that cover every adult skull in a new and terrifying light. Those deep, parallel gouges on the snout, the ones that sometimes rot through the bone, aren't just the badges of a tough life. They are the physical archives of constant civil war. For years, paleontologists thought the face-biting was purely a mating ritual. Like male deer locking antlers, T-Rex locked jaws and pushed, their armored faces absorbing the crushing force. But the discovery of specimens like this, an adolescent killed cleanly by a skull-crushing bite, tells us the ritual often got out of hand. This wasn't just a contest, it was an execution. And the terrifying reality of the T-Rex's social world is that it was built on a knife's edge between cooperation and cannibalism. The very same pack that might help you survive your awkward teenage years could, in a moment of desperation or hierarchy, become the thing that crushes your skull while you sleep. If you still think of these animals as Hollywood monsters, consider this: the T-Rex you are watching right now, the one currently tearing chunks from its own kin, is likely not a stranger. The chemical signature in the scent, the familiarity in the confrontation, suggests these two animals shared a territory, perhaps even a lineage. The cannibalism is not mindless savagery. It is resource optimization. In a world where 100 square kilometers can barely support one fully grown adult, a dead relative is not a tragedy. It is fuel. But the danger didn't just come from the teeth of rivals. If you wonder why the king was so patient, why it conserved every single calorie like a miser counting coins, the answer is written inside its broken bones. Let's talk about Sue. Sue, the most complete and famous T-Rex ever found, is a walking hospital record. When you look at the entire skeleton, you see not just the holes in the jaw, but a left shoulder blade that was shattered and healed into a twisted lump. You see 3 fused tail vertebrae, the result of a catastrophic fall or a blow that would have left the tail hanging at a crooked angle for the rest of its life. And you see something even more insidious, a case of gout in the hand bones. Gout is a disease of excess uric acid, the same painful, crystalline swelling that plagued Henry VIII. In a T-Rex, it meant that the tiny arms, already nearly useless, became inflamed, hot to the touch and agonizing to move. Scientists looking at the lesions on Sue's forearm bones have concluded she suffered from a chronic, severe infection that likely rendered the arm totally immobile. So you take the 9-ton killing machine, the one with the most powerful bite force ever measured, and you realize it lived for years unable to use one of its limbs, with a jaw that was literally rotting from the inside out, with a shuffled gait from a broken spine, and with the stabbing pain of gout every time it tried to push itself upright from a nap. This animal was not a superhero. It was a survivor of multiple organ failure level traumas, walking around day after day with the accumulated damage of a lifetime of war. And Sue is not unique. A study of multiple T-Rex specimens found that nearly every adult shows signs of a condition called avulsion necrosis. When the massive thigh muscles contracted with too much force, the tendons ripped chunks of bone away from the shin. The shin bones of these animals are pitted with deep, permanent craters where the flesh literally tore the skeleton apart from the inside. This didn't kill them instantly. It healed, slowly, painfully, for months. A T-Rex with a freshly avulsed tendon could not put its full weight on its leg. It hopped. A 9-ton giant hopping on 1 foot through the Cretaceous mud. The image is almost absurd, but the pain was absolutely real. So why did they push their bodies to the breaking point? Why engage in face-biting battles that left them with open skull wounds vulnerable to parasitic infection? The answer lies in the one thing that could drive a creature too tough to die into a constant cycle of self-destruction. The need to reproduce. The T-Rex's daily life was, in many ways, an extended preparation for a single, vanishingly rare act of mating. We think of the roaring, the head bobbing, the charges, but the actual physical mechanics of 2 9-ton animals creating the next generation is a puzzle that has left paleontologists blushing for decades. The logistics are absurd. The male T-Rex, likely slightly smaller and quicker, would have approached with the utmost caution, using the same submissive postures we see in modern birds and crocodilians. He would have lowered his head, avoiding eye contact, perhaps vibrating his throat to produce a low, infrasonic rumble that traveled through the female's body. And then the balance act. The female had to support his weight without collapsing. The tiny arms, in this single context, might have found their only true use, holding on. The curved claws, each one capable of gouging 6 inches into flesh, might have hooked into the thick hide of her back, not in violence but in a desperate attempt not to slide off. If he lost his grip, if she stumbled, if the ground was too muddy, the result was not just embarrassment, It was the catastrophic ligament tears and bone avulsions we see in the fossils. Mating was a life-threatening event, and the face-biting, that may have been part of the courtship. Or, more darkly, it may have been the female's way of testing the male's resilience. A suitor who couldn't survive a shattered jaw was not worthy of passing on his genes. This context completely redefines the solitary patrol you witnessed before. The male we are following now, the one who just cannibalized a younger rival, is not just a wanderer, he is a searcher. The 100 square kilometers of territory he meticulously checks every day is not just a pantry. It is a map of potential mates. Every scent mark, every scarred tree trunk, every deep, booming infrasonic call that shakes the ground is a signal in a continental game of love and death. And when he finally found the scent of another adult today, it was not simply the blood of a kill that drew him in. It was the chemical signature of a female in estrus. The dead juvenile was collateral damage, possibly her own offspring from a previous season, driven off too late and killed by a rival male. The calculus of T-Rex society was brutally simple. A female could not afford to protect her adolescent young once a new breeding cycle began. The solitary life of the adult was not a choice, it was an evolutionary expulsion. To survive, you had to leave the family unit that raised you. If you didn't, you ended up like the body in the clearing, a victim of the very social bonds that had kept you alive. And yet, despite this grim ejector seat of adolescence, the evidence is mounting that the family bonds didn't snap entirely. This is where the wait, it gets even bigger moment arrives. We have to look past the broken bones and the cannibalism and ask a much more radical question. Did the T-Rex love its children? Let's re-examine the rainbow's site. 4 or 5 tyrannosaurs died together in a sudden catastrophe. Their size range spans from full adult to juvenile. If it had been a random predator trap, a mud pit, you would expect a random assortment of fossils. But the geochemistry of the rare earth elements in their bones proves they were buried in the exact same slice of mud. They were a coherent social group moving together when something killed them all. Perhaps a flood, perhaps a toxic gas release from a volcanic vent. What this tells us is that, at least in some tyrannosaurs, the family unit persisted well beyond the juvenile stage. The adults didn't immediately cast out the teenagers. They tolerated them. They may even have cooperated with them in hunts. The lanky, swift teenagers flushing prey toward the bone-crunching ambush of the massive adult. This is not a behavior found in modern reptiles. It is a behavior found in mammals and birds. It is complex, cooperative, and deeply social. And then there is the soft tissue. The miraculous preservation of blood vessels and proteins inside the thigh bone of a T-Rex, nicknamed B. rex, the same specimen that yielded the first flexible tissues back in 2005. When Mary Schweitzer and her team analyzed those vessels further, they discovered something utterly staggering. Inside the bone marrow cavity, mixed in with the collagen, were structures that looked exactly like medullary bone. Medullary bone is a special, calcium-rich tissue that modern female birds produce only when they are laying eggs. It acts as a calcium reservoir for the shells. Its presence in a T-Rex not only proves that this specific dinosaur was female, but it proves she was pregnant, or at least in a breeding state. Right before she died, medullary bone is temporary. It is a physiological snapshot of motherhood frozen for 68 million years. And if female T-Rex produced medullary bone, it means they laid eggs. If they laid eggs, they almost certainly built nests, brooded on them, and then, crucially, cared for the hatchlings after they emerged. Because a hatchling T-Rex, barely the size of a turkey, was utterly helpless. It had no crushing bite. It had needle teeth. It needed someone to bring it food. The notion of the T-Rex as a gentle parent, sitting on a nest mound of rotting vegetation, the steam rising around her pebbled skin, tenderly dropping morsels of shredded meat into the gaping mouths of a dozen fuzzy chicks, is now grounded in hard, physical evidence. The monster that could crush a car with its jaws also spent months of its life in devoted, single-parent care, losing sleep, foregoing food, and defending its helpless offspring from other predators. And the baddest predator on the planet, the biggest threat to those chicks, was its own kind. You see the female now. She emerges from the far side of the clearing, her massive head swinging into view from behind a stand of cycads. The male, still standing over the carcass of the juvenile, freezes, his amber eyes fix on her. She is slightly larger than he is, her skull thicker, the bony knobs above her eyes more pronounced. Her snout is covered in a latticework of old, healed scars. This is not her first season. She knows the male. They have met before, perhaps many seasons ago, and the reunion is tense. He lowers his head, avoiding direct eye contact, the universal signal of appeasement in Tyrannosaurs. A low rumble, almost sub-audible, vibrates through the mud. She doesn't charge, she doesn't bite his face. She simply exhales, a cloud of steam in the cooling evening air, and steps toward the Triceratops carcass. He backs away, giving her space, and she begins to feed. The hierarchy is clear. The infanticide of the juvenile, perhaps a lingering reminder of a previous bond, is simply ignored. The drive to mate, to continue the genetic dynasty, overrides every other social impulse. The king and queen of the Cretaceous will share this meal, and then, for a brief and violent period, they will tolerate each other's presence long enough to create a new generation. After that, the solitary patrol will resume. The quiet, painful, and terrifyingly patient life of the Tyrannosaurus rex will go on, exactly as it had for millions of years. But wait! Because right now, as you stand in this clearing watching two of the most dangerous animals ever to walk, the Earth behave with a complexity that rivals wolves, you are probably asking the biggest question of all. If they were this smart, this social, this perfectly adapted, why did they vanish? Why did this entire world, this lush, humid, noisy ecosystem of giants, get cut short? You already know the answer. The asteroid. But the truth about how the T-Rex's own biology sealed its fate in the face of that catastrophe is far more profound and far more tragic than a simple rock from space. Because the very things that made the T-Rex the king, its slow growth, its low metabolism, its extreme specialization, were the very things that turned an extinction event into a total and absolute erasure. And the final chapter of its life, the one written not in bone, but in the layer of iridium that blankets the planet, reveals why the quiet, patient king never had a chance. The exact moment that ended the Cretaceous arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The T-Rex and his mate were still in the clearing, the Triceratops carcass now a skeletal ruin, their bellies full for the first time in a week. The female was lying on her side in the mud, her massive ribcage rising and falling in a rhythm so slow it seemed geological. He stood guard a few meters away, head low, eyes half closed. The forest was quiet, the dawn chorus of strange birds just beginning. Then the entire northern horizon flickered. It wasn't a sound that came first. It was a light, a blinding, searing blue-white flash that turned the misty morning into a snapshot of overexposed agony. The asteroid, an object the size of Mount Everest, moving at 20 kilometers per second, hit the shallow sea near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula with the force of 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. For the T-Rex, there was no time to process the visual information. The seismic shockwave raced through the bedrock at 20,000 kilometers an hour. Arriving before the sound, the ground beneath his feet didn't just shake, it liquefied. The 9-ton Titan was thrown into the air like a kitten, his massive skull slamming into the trunk of an araucaria tree. The female, caught mid-breath, was flipped onto her back, the broken Triceratops ribs beneath her snapping like old twigs. The sound followed, a universe-ending roar that wasn't heard so much as felt. A pressure wave that pulverized eardrums and ruptured internal organs. Within a radius of 1,500 kilometers, there was no survival. The Hell Creek Formation, the lush kingdom of ferns and conifers, was flattened in an instant by a supersonic wind of superheated gas and ejecta. Everything that had defined the T-Rex's world, the 100 square kilometers of scent-marked territory, the patient patrols, the complex social hierarchies, vanished in a single tectonic heartbeat. But for the creatures living on the other side of the planet, the initial explosion was the least of their worries. The asteroid didn't just vaporize itself and a few thousand square kilometers of limestone. It excavated a crater 180 kilometers wide and launched 25 trillion metric tons of debris into the atmosphere. Most of it was vaporized rock, rich in sulfur compounds, which immediately condensed into a global blanket of sulfate aerosols. The entire planet was wrapped in a shroud so thick that for the next year, the sun was reduced to a feeble, ghostly glow. Photosynthesis stopped. The plants, from the towering araucarias to the smallest ferns, began to die. Not in days, but in weeks. The herbivores, the vast herds of Triceratops and Edmontosaurus that had roamed the floodplains, faced a grisly calculus. Their guts, designed to process tons of coarse vegetation per day, were suddenly empty. They starved in the darkness, their massive bodies piling up along dried riverbeds. Neither predator nor scavenger able to keep pace with the sheer quantity of decaying flesh. And it is here, in this sunless, freezing nightmare, that the biology of the Tyrannosaurus rex was put to its final, ultimate test. The animal we have followed through its slow, painful, beautiful life had been shaped by millions of years of stable evolution. It was the pinnacle of a specific kind of predator. Large, long-lived, slow to reproduce, and profoundly energy efficient. Its low metabolic rate, the pilot-light physiology that allowed it to walk for days without eating, should have been an advantage in a famine. A crocodile, after all, can survive a year without a meal. But the T-Rex was not a cold-blooded crocodile. It was a warm-blooded bird relative that had traded away the high-energy lifestyle of its smaller ancestors for size and power. But it had not traded away the need for a constant, minimum caloric intake. An adult T-Rex, even resting, required roughly 40,000 calories a day just to keep its massive body from cannibalizing its own muscle. And in the sunless, plantless world that followed the impact, 40,000 calories was an impossible demand. The small mammals, the furry little creatures that had skittered under the feet of the dinosaurs for 160 million years, faced the same darkness with a completely different toolkit. They could burrow, they could hibernate, they could eat the seeds and roots that remained dormant in the frozen soil. A tiny mammal could survive on a fraction of the calories a T-Rex burned in the time it took to blink. The dinosaurs, for all their size and majesty, were trapped on the surface of a dying planet. The juveniles, the lanky, fast-growing teenagers that had once been the future of the species, were the first to go. Their growth required a constant surplus of protein and calcium. Deprived of food, their bones stopped growing, then began to resorb into their own bodies. The stress lines in the fossil record, and there are some tantalizing hints in the very last Cretaceous rocks, show a generation of creatures with arrested development, their skeletons riddled with the physical markers of starvation. The next generation was never even born. The medullary bone in the female we met in the clearing, that miraculous tissue that proved she was ready to lay eggs, went unused. Her body reabsorbed it, the calcium leaching back into her bloodstream as she slowly weakened. The complex, cooperative family units that the Rainbow Site hinted at fractured under the pressure of starvation. The face-biting that had once been a ritual of dominance became a desperate, no-holds-barred fight for access to the last remaining carcasses. Cannibalism, once a rare and calculated resource optimization, became the default. The very social bonds that had defined their success now accelerated their demise. And yet, the most devastating revelation of all is that the T-Rex almost made it, the fossil record just above the iridium layer. The global stripe of asteroid dust that marks the end of the Cretaceous is silent. No bone of a non-avian dinosaur has ever been definitively found in the Paleogene rocks that follow. But there is a whisper, a frustratingly faint signal, that suggests a handful of individuals might have staggered on for a few thousand years. Isolated teeth, shards of bone, found in contexts that are ambiguous enough to fuel decades of academic warfare. What is not ambiguous is the ecological vacuum that was left behind. The asteroid did not just kill the T-Rex. It erased its entire world. The Araucaria forests were replaced by ferns, then by the first flowering plants that could colonize the ash. The mammals, free from the crushing pressure of dinosaur predation, exploded into the empty niches. The quiet, patient king, the animal that had spent 30 years walking through the mist, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, discovered that the perfect moment would never come again. But the story of the T-Rex does not end in that freezing, sunless tomb. Because right now, as you lie here in the dark, there is a direct, living, breathing connection to that Cretaceous world. It's in your own backyard. It's in the chicken you might eat tomorrow. When Mary Schweitzer pulled those flexible blood vessels from the thigh bone of a T-Rex in 2005, she didn't just find ancient tissue. She found proteins whose molecular sequences she could read, and when she read them, they spelled out a family tree. The collagen of the T-Rex matched the collagen of ostriches and chickens more closely than any living reptile. The king is not dead. It simply changed form. Every sparrow, every pigeon, every domestic chicken that clucks in a barnyard is a direct descendant of the theropod dinosaurs. The fuzzy, downy feathers of a chick are the same structures that once covered the juvenile T-Rex. The wishbone you pull apart at a holiday dinner is the same anatomical structure that anchored the massive flight muscles of the dinosaurs' ancestors. And the crazy thing, the detail that changes everything you thought you knew about extinction, is that the asteroid didn't kill the dinosaurs. It killed the non-avian dinosaurs. The avian dinosaurs, the ones that were small, feathered, warm-blooded, and capable of flight, survived. They made it through the impact winter, and 66 million years later, they sing the dawn chorus that the last T-Rex never lived to hear. The quiet, patient king did not vanish into oblivion. He was atomized and rebuilt into a world of song. But our connection goes even deeper than that. The reason we have his soft tissue in a museum drawer, the reason we can look at his actual cells under a microscope, is because of a chemical accident that reads like a cosmic poem. The iron in dinosaur blood, the very iron that carried oxygen through the 68-million-year-old heart, acted as a molecular embalming fluid. It triggered a cascade of reactions that cross-linked the proteins, locking them in a mesh so tight that even bacteria couldn't break them down. That iron is the same iron that flows through your veins right now. The element that makes our blood red, that binds the oxygen we breathe, is a direct chemical inheritance from a world that ended. The T-Rex is not just a fossil in a museum. You carry a piece of its biochemistry inside you. The quiet, patient walk through the mist is, in a very real physical sense, a walk your own ancestors once took, not as mammals, but as the shared proto-reptilian creatures that gave rise to both the dinosaurs and us. We are cousins, separated by 300 million years of divergence, but reunited in a single atom of iron that once beat through a dinosaur heart. And so, the real answer to what life was like for a Tyrannosaurus rex is this. It was a life of quiet endurance, punctuated by moments of unspeakable violence. It was a life of slow, patient growth, stretched over decades, in a world that rewarded the careful conservation of energy. It was a life of complex social bonds, of face-biting dominance, of cooperative hunts, and of tender, parental care. It was a life filled with chronic pain, with shattered shoulders, rotting jawbones, and the agony of torn tendons. It was a life of walking, endlessly walking, through a world of mist and ferns, guided by a map of scent. It was a life that, for all its majesty, stood no chance against a sudden, catastrophic change in the rules of the game. The Hollywood monster, the roaring, sprinting, calculating villain, is a fiction born of our own fear. The reality is far more profound, far more fragile, and far more connected to us than we ever dared imagine. Now, as the night wraps itself around you, I want you to listen to the quiet, that distant hum of a car engine, that creak of the floorboards, even that faint rustle of a bird settling in a tree outside your window. That bird, that tiny, fragile creature, is the last echo of an empire. When it breathes with lungs inherited from the theropods. When it cocks its head to look at the morning sun, it sees with eyes whose basic design was perfected by the T-Rex. The quiet, patient king is gone, but he never really left. He just learned to sing. And as that song fades into the hum of the modern world, you might find yourself lying there in the dark, still wrapped in your blanket, haunted by a single, uncomfortable question. If the T-Rex, the most perfectly adapted apex predator the land has ever produced, could be erased so completely, so mercilessly, by a single random cosmic event, what does that say about us? About our own quiet, patient kingdoms? We are not so different. We build our territories out of concrete and Wi-Fi signals, signal our dominance with job titles and social media accounts, and walk our own slow patrols through the fluorescent-lit forests of our daily commutes. The T-Rex had a 100 square kilometer territory it knew by scent. We have an infinite digital landscape we navigate by algorithm. And just like the king, we are mostly just walking, conserving our energy, waiting for the next meal, the next promotion, the next chance to prove we belong. The face-biting rivalries have become passive-aggressive emails. The cannibalism has become corporate restructuring. But the underlying truth, the one the bones whisper when they're carefully brushed clean of 66 million years of mud, is that dominance is never permanent. The top of the food chain is a temporary lease, not a purchase. The T-Rex held the crown for over 2 million years. Our species has been building cities for perhaps 10,000. The numbers do not flatter us. There is a concept in paleontology called the Lazarus taxon. It refers to a creature that disappears from the fossil record, sometimes for millions of years, only to reappear as if risen from the dead. The T-Rex is, in a way, a Lazarus taxon of the soul. It vanished from the sunlit world of the Cretaceous, only to re-emerge, not as a living beast, but as an obsession buried deep in our collective psyche. We put it in our movies, our nightmares, our children's pajamas. We have given it a fame that no living animal, not even the lion or the great white shark, can rival. Why? What is it about this specific dinosaur that refuses to let us go? It's not just the size or the teeth. I think it's the paradox. The quiet patience we now know it possessed, the loneliness, the chronic pain, the family loyalty, the slow, grinding determination to survive another day despite a broken shoulder and a rotting jaw. We look at the T-Rex, and we see a distorted, magnified reflection of our own struggles. We too are animals trying to navigate a world of constant social pressure, physical deterioration, and the looming, unspoken awareness that one day a random asteroid will blow it all to pieces. The T-Rex is not a monster. The T-Rex is us, stripped of our illusions of control, walking slowly through the mist of an uncertain world. And yet, the most mind-bending, lingering question is not about the past. It's about the future. If the asteroid had struck 30 minutes earlier, or 30 minutes later, the rotation of the Earth would have placed it in the deep Pacific, not the shallow, sulfur-rich gypsum beds of Yucatan. The impact might not have triggered the same global winter. The dinosaurs might have survived. The mammals might have stayed small. There would be no television, no blankets, no voice whispering this story into the dark. The entire 66 million year journey that led to this exact moment, the precise alignment of tectonic plates, asteroid trajectories, and the evolutionary lottery of who lived and who died, was a dice roll so improbable that it borders on a miracle. And if it could happen to the T-Rex, it can happen again. We are, right now, in the middle of our own asteroid-level extinction event, one of our own making. The quiet, patient king was brought down by physics. We are doing it to ourselves with chemistry. The T-Rex had no warning, no control. We have both. And the question that should keep you awake is not whether we will avoid the fate of the dinosaurs. It's whether we will prove, in the end, to be less intelligent than a creature with a brain the size of a walnut. Because the T-Rex, for all its supposed stupidity, never destroyed its own ecosystem. It lived within its means. It walked. It conserved. It endured. It fought its rivals face to face in honest combat, not through global systems of invisible destruction. Perhaps the boring dinosaur facts are not so boring after all. Perhaps they are a manual for survival. So now, as the final wisps of Cretaceous fog dissipate from your mind and the gentle weight of sleep begins to pull at your eyelids, I want you to hold on to that image. Not the roaring tyrant, but the quiet walker, the ancient, aching survivor. Its breath steaming in the dim orange light, its massive feet leaving deep, deliberate prints in the mud. Those prints are still there, fossilized in Montana, North Dakota, British Columbia. You can go and stand in them. You can place your own foot inside the footprint of a creature that lived a life, not of mindless violence, but of profound, patient endurance. And if you listen closely enough, if you strip away the noise of the modern world, you might just hear it. The low, rumbling, sub-audible sound of a 9-ton heartbeat, still echoing through the warm iron that flows through your own veins. The king is gone. The king is here. The king is you. If you've enjoyed this journey into the real life of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and you want to drift off to more deeply factual, quietly astonishing stories from the deep past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your subscription tells the algorithm that there are still people out there who prefer the quiet. Truth to the loud myth. Drop a comment below telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the global map of the night owls and the insomniacs, all of us connected by these ancient stories. Now dim your screen, burrow deeper into your blankets, and let the quiet, patient walk of the old king carry you gently into sleep. Sweet dreams.